Howdy Beans, and welcome back to another episode of the Nerdstalgic podcast with me, your host Luke. Hope you're doing well, as per usual. Today we've got something interesting that I want to talk about, which I haven't talked about in quite a while, to be honest. It's an old series that I ran in season one, and it's kind of been neglected, kind of got a bit dusty, so I've had to blow the dust off it and bring it back for season two. But before I get onto that, I just want to say if you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to give me a like, subscribe, write a comment, share it with your friends. It all helps. My goal is to get to 60 subscribers. I'm currently at 58 as recording this. So all I need is two of you to listen to this and go, I'll give that ginger guy a subscribe. So if you can do that, I'll be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much. Also, make sure you follow me on Twitter at nerdstalgic_pod to make sure you're updated with everything that I'm doing. I always post what I'm watching, what I'm reading, what I'm playing, anything like that. You'll always be updated there first before anywhere else. So make sure you follow me on nerdstalgic_pod on Twitter. And yeah, so into the subject, into the topic. So you've probably already seen the title of this episode before you turned it on and gave it a listen. I'm going to be reviewing Ice Age 2: The Meltdown. And this is part of my sort of Remembering Blue Sky series. Now, for anybody who's new, season two, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you. Anybody who has been listening since season one, welcome back. Thank you for returning. I appreciate it so much. But for all you new beans out there, basically, back in season one last year, Blue Sky Studios, who makes the likes of Robots, Ice Age, Rio, they made the Peanuts movie, Ferdinand. Trying to think what else they did. I've already said Robots, didn't I? Yeah, but they're mostly known for the Ice Age crew, basically. And they were bought out by Disney when Disney bought Fox. And because Disney basically owns Pixar and they actually have their own animated studio, that the Fox sort of branch of animation, which was mostly just Blue Sky, and they just kind of subsidized it. They liquidated it, and I don't know what happened to any of the people that worked there. I would like to think that they went off and had jobs in other animated studios, or actually internally in Pixar or DreamWorks or wherever. But it kind of moved me when I learned that this studio that been running since my childhood. Like I was born in '98. Their first proper big movie was 2001 with Ice Age. So it's always been in my childhood. So when I found out that the studio got shut down, I thought I've got to do something to live on. To give them a legacy, which they do have, and kind of remember it and have a look back. So within doing that, I decided to look back at the history of them in my first ever episode about what they'd done, where they started, what was the first ever animated movie that they did, which was a short story by Bunny, and I reviewed it. And then from there, I have since watched Ice Age 1 and reviewed that. I watched Robots and reviewed that. And then that was it, really. I kind of left it because I got really busy afterwards, and it started to get towards the end of the year, and I had a big backlog of things I needed to catch up on, and I had my whole Narnia plan that I had for December. So I never really kind of got back around to it. So I figured start of the year, it's currently February. It's that kind of, especially if you live in the UK, it's one of those sort of days in the year where it's not too hot, it's not too cold, but it's one of those where you don't really want to leave the house. So, a nice, warm, gentle, family-friendly movie about the Ice Age to warm you up, because obviously when you need warming up, you're going to watch a movie about ice. It just makes so much sense. Um, I figured it'd be nice. So that's for anybody who is recurring or anybody who hasn't listened to anything in season one. Go back and listen to my Ice Age review. Specifically, listen to my Robots review because I love Robots, and if I'm being honest, it's a very underappreciated animated movie, and I just enjoy it greatly. So if you can go back and give those a listen, again, I'm full of appreciation today, right? But I would really appreciate it if you was to go after you've listened to this one, of course, to go back and give the old ones a listen, just to kind of catch up, really, as well as I think you'd like them. So there's that. Also, with this episode, I'm going to try and something different. So usually when I do any sort of review, whether it be movies, video games, books, whatever, I always sort of tend to obviously watch the movie first, play the game first, and all that jazz, which is obvious. It's just how every sort of review is usually done. Because how can you write the review if you haven't sort of watched it, read it, or played it? You know what I mean? But I wanted to try something different. As you beans would know, I am very odd in terms of how I do things, how I structure things. I don't really do what everybody else is doing, which is probably why I'm not as successful. But even so, like, I like to do things different. I like to experiment. I'm constantly trying to reinvent what I'm doing, because I like to keep keep myself on my toes, try something different, and make it more interesting and fun for you beans. Because I would imagine if you listen to this, you're probably a regular to other podcasts, and I would imagine because for example, for myself, all the other podcasts that I listen to, again, they all follow the same structure. They all follow the same sort of narrative, and it's fun, but it gets a bit tiresome because you just know how the structure's planned out and played out, and that's why I like for example, I love the ladies at Doom Generation because their structure is very sort of different. Instead of it being like we talk about this, then we talk about that, we talk about this. It's very much just like it's like you're watching the movie with them. Now you could put the movie on and listen to the podcast with them. And granted that the podcast would be over before the film was over, but you still felt like even if you wasn't watching the film, you were still with them watching the movie on the settee, and that's just the feeling that they have. And it's very different from other movie podcasts that I've listened to, where it's very structured, you know. So again, I like to try things differently. So what I mean by differently in terms of this episode is that, like I said, I am not. I've seen Ice Age 2. I've seen it many times. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to do the introduction first, which also one saves time so that I can get round to actually watching the sort of movie at a later date. So it helps with that, but also the fact I thought it'd be kind of interesting, kind of give my thoughts of what I remember from my childhood without it being tainted by what my recent memories are. So, because what I tend to do whenever I do any sort of review is I tend to give away how my feelings. I tend to say in the introduction, "Oh, I really liked this one. Oh, well, I was a bit, this one was a bit crap, or this one, was okay, but I tend to do those little mannerisms. And when I was listening to myself over when I was doing my editing, I feel like I give away the interesting stuff accidentally within my mannerisms. So I figured if I do it this way, it not just saves me time, but I can also kind of leave a bit of sort of suspense. Give you beans a reason to, keep listening. Because if I'm in the introduction and being like, "Oh, this one was great," you'd be like, "Oh, well, he liked it. That's it." I'm not saying you beans would do that, but I wouldn't blame anybody being like, "Well, he's already give away the punchline. Well, he might as well what's the point staying for the rest of it." You know what I mean? So I get it. I completely get it. So I just want to try something different. So Ice Age 2, again, it's very much like the first Ice Age. If you want my honest opinion, from what I can remember, I remember myself not needing and not feel like we needed an Ice Age 2, which is a very odd thing for a young boy, a young being, to say. Because again, we had the likes of Shrek, and I really wanted a Shrek 2. Madagascar. I loved Madagascar, but it was very much the fact of, yeah, I'd like to see what happens next. But with Ice Age, I don't know what it was. I just felt like it was always on TV. It was always a movie that it was always on. ITV2, ITV. It was always on one of these sort of channels. But during the summer, it'd be on during Christmas. It'd be on during Easter. If there was ever a time where kids weren't in school, you can bet that Ice Age would be on the TV. It was just the standard, right? And so watching the first movie over and over again, I've grown to appreciate and love the characters. But how that movie ends, I never felt like I needed a sequel. Like it was never something that I felt like I wanted to see. It was just that I enjoyed it for what it was. But I have Toy Story and all these other sort of animated movies. I didn't appreciate it fully, I'll admit, but it was very much the fact of I liked it. I think it's good, but I'll go and watch Shrek and Madagascar. It was mainly, if anything, it was oversaturation. It was a saturation of seeing this movie all the time, constantly. That I enjoyed it, but I'm done with these characters now, right? So I think that's where that stems from, where that comes from there. But as an adult, and as growing up, when I was younger, when they eventually made the sequel, I enjoyed it, but from what I can remember, I do feel like there were parts where like I just wanted the original crew. Diego, Manny, Sid. That's it. the three amigos. That's all I wanted. That's them three. And with this one, they bring in Peaches, not Peaches. And again, one of the downsides of not watching the movie before you do the introduction, really. But they introduce a love interest for Manny. They introduce the two Possum brothers, which then kind of makes that family a bit bigger, as well as the whole idea, which I like the concept behind it. Because one thing I've always explained, and one of the reasons why I do ask people to go back and watch Ice Age 1 and Robots and my reviews of them, is because Blue Sky always did a thing where they always had social commentary, but in a smart way, in their um, movies. For example, Ice Age, the commentary they have there is very much the fact of, it it's like when you go through a struggle like Manny went through, where he lost his family, it's very easy to shut yourself off. But it's one of them things of like, whatever we have lost in our life, I'm not going to get really sort of emotional here or spiritual here, but when we have lost in our life, a lot of people tend to shut themselves off. And the story is very much the fact of, you need friends, you need people, you need to get yourself back out into the world, you know. And in turns he does. He meets Sid and he changes, and he meets the baby, and he sort of kind of atones for his hatred of humans. He atones for his hatred of the world, and he's sort of like lone wolf. He decides that he wants to be a family again. It's a very weird family, but he wants to be a family again. And when you have robots, it's very corporate. It's very the fact of the rich get richer and the poor can't afford to live, so the poor end up going to the chop shop, which again you could kind of deter that the poor just go to die really. And everything's getting more expensive and harder, and then when you have people that are trying to help those people that are struggling, the people up high want to shut them down because it's that hierarchy of like bigger is better, and if you're in the lower half, then just die, we don't care about you. So there's always that social sort of commentary. With this one, it's very much about Ice Age. It's very much about climate change. It's very much about the world's getting warmer. The ice is melting. And it's kind of like a Noah's Ark as well. It's the fact of ice is melting. The sort of giant ice wall that's around this like little valley is melting, and behind it is like huge tons and tons of liters of glacial water, and that is because the planet's getting warmer, which it is naturally. This is not to do with humans. It was just naturally getting warmer because that's just how the ice age happened. But it's very much the fact of, as it's getting warmer, the ice is going to melt and we're all going to die, and that's going to be the end of us. It's going to be the extinction event for us. And for them, it's the end of the world. But as we know, it led on to sort of humanity and all that kind of jazz, really. So there's always like a message, and with this one, it was very much Ice Age. But I from what I can remember, I enjoyed it. I liked it. Again, I didn't feel like I needed it, but I liked it for what it was. But again, this movie ends in such a way, from what I can remember, where you don't feel like you need a sequel. But then they kept making more. And don't worry, we will talk about the more ones that they make. But that's sort of my memory from a childhood of what this movie was. It was just a sequel that I didn't really want or need, that we got, and that I thought it was interesting. I liked it. I thought it was fun to see these characters again. They looked better. Obviously, the animation style and the technology had improved, so they looked a lot more they looked better, a lot more sort of animalistic, a lot more furry, less like wax models, really. And it was one of those where I wanted the original crew, and I was happy at the beginning that we got the original crew. But then they added in more, and I was like, I don't know if I like this. It eventually grew on me, I will admit, but it's very much the fact of, I'd watched the first movie so many times that I'd kind of been set in my old man ways, and I was like, nah, I prefer the original crew, don't want to add new people in. But again, I grew to appreciate it. So that's my initial thoughts and feelings of when I was a child, when I was a young being. I'm going off to go watch the movie now, so those views might change. And that's the beauty of doing this before I've seen the movie, because again, I'm just remembering from when I was very younger. I haven't seen this movie in a very long time. I am now 25 years old. I am technically an old adult being. I'm not old, but an old bit, an adult being. And my views might have changed. I might watch it now with an adult view and be like, oh, I can see what they're doing there. I can see that joke. I can see this joke. I can see what they were trying to say here. I can properly break it down, and I might hate it. I might watch this movie and go, oh, this wasn't as good as I remember. Or I could watch it and go, this was actually a lot better than I remember. So that's one of the beauties of doing this before, is that you get two sides of the coin. You get my young Bean side and you get my current old Bean side. So without further ado, I'm going to start blabbing. I'm going to go off and watch the movie now. And when I return, I've had watched the movie and you will get my full review. So I will see you in a minute. So we are back in the Ice Age, and honestly, I've missed it. I really have missed being in the Ice Age. I think the last time that we were here, it was Ice Age 1, and I think, if I'm being honest, I think I went a bit deeper into the story than was actually on the surface. When I re-listen to it now, I tend to think of like, Luke, you went a bit too deep there, a bit deeper than a kid's animated movie than you should have. But then again, from watching Robots and then from watching this movie, I feel like my assumptions of Blue Sky Studios, where they would make a animated movie for kids, but they would be underlining sort of facts and sort of ideas and that sort of thing underneath, that if you was to read between the lines, you would actually see the clear sort of story sort of agenda, shall we say, that they were trying to tell. You know what I mean? So I might go a bit deep here. I might not. It depends. I've got my notes as per usual. I don't know if you can hear that. That's me scrumpling my notes so you can hear them. So to start off, the movie starts with Scrat causing havoc again with his nut, which it's nice to see Scrat again. And what I love about this movie is that it's not just great to be back into this world, but obviously a lot of years have passed since Ice Age 1 at this point. Ice Age 1 came out, Robots came out, then it was Ice Age 2. So, the animators have got a lot better. The engine that they use has got a lot better. It might be even a new engine that they use for animation. They've honed their skills. They know how to properly animate and make certain things look better than they did. Because on Ice Age 1, Ice Age 1's still good, but a lot of the sort of animals and creatures and lands looked very waxy, looked very sort of plasticine, sort of modelled, or they didn't look very detailed. And that's fine, like that was the animation for the time. And obviously, as animations got better, fur and stuff like that has been easy to animate. One of the best sort of examples was actually Monsters Inc. when you have Sully. One of the hardest parts of that movie, and one of the parts that was the most animated, was Sully and his fur, because you had to do in each individual sort of fur effect. And obviously, it was the same for Manny. Manny in Ice Age 1, he had his fur, but he still didn't look foofy, if that's a word, yeah, puffy, foofy. Then you get the Ice Age 2, where he looks a lot better now. So it's nice to be back into this world, and it looks better, better animation, sort of style, techniques, looks a lot better, better graphics. I will admit, though, I do want to say this, that Robots did look better, and I think the reason behind that is because we're going from a sort of organic world, which is Ice Age, very natural, very animals, leaves, trees, plants, that sort of thing, dirt, to a very inorganic world with robots where it's all metal, it's all shiny, that sort of thing. So you can do more details in terms of robots and the sort of world building and the way the streets look and the way the houses look and all that. You can do a little bit more detail there. That's why I think that film looks better, because in terms of animation, you're not building anything that's quote unquote realistic that we have in this world, whereas Ice Age is more sort of organic, very sort of real to life, or what as real to life was back in the Ice Age, or during the Ice Age, should I say. So I would say Ice Age, I mean, Robots looks better, but it's nice to see Ice Age 2, Scrat causing chaos. It's wonderful, it's nostalgic, and it's just nice to be back into this world where it looks a lot better. Also, one thing I want to mention, I kind of forgot this fact, and I wish I had talked about it in the introduction. I had this game. I had a game of this for the PlayStation 2. It was a simple game, from what I can remember. As anybody who knows, who's been listening to the show for a long while, I do my movie license tie-in game series, where I go back and I look at old games that were movie licensed and that sort of thing. And I've made the point, and I've told the story a few times, where growing up, I didn't have a lot of pocket money, didn't have a lot of income. Again, I was only a young bean, so of course I didn't. I relied on my parents. So it was a fact of when I did get the opportunity to get a game, I always went to movie tie-in sort of games. Because I knew they was a safe bet. Around about the time that Ice Age 2 came out, again, at the time, I really, really love Ice Age. So I was like, oh, that looks like a fun game. I get to play Scrat. I really do like Scrat. So it was a fact of, yeah, I'll get it. And from what I can remember with the game, which is not a lot in all fairness, because I never completed it because it was hard, but I did enjoy it. From what I can remember, the idea of the game was you played a Scrat and you went. It was like a sandboxy sort of game. So you went from level to level to level, and each inside each level was loads of little mini games that as Scrat you had to sort of complete to get to the next level. And it was all about collecting nuts and then trying to collect enough nuts so when you get to the end you can kind of you've got all the nuts basically. But it was mostly a game about mini games and that sort of thing. It was like a small linear open world. A lot of fun. Very, very safe, very secure in terms of, a movie license game. But to be honest with you, I can't remember much about it. But I think I enjoyed it, if I remember correctly. Even though I didn't complete it, I think I enjoyed what I played. The rest was just really difficult, and I think I got frustrated with it. But I just wanted to sort of throw that one in here. So, Ice Age 2. The Ice Age is coming to an end. Global warming at its finest. The ice is melting, and somehow, I don't know how, because I'm really confused. Again, I know it's a kids' film. I get it, right? And even though I said I wasn't going to go that deep with this movie, I've got to go a bit deep here because I'm a bit confused, right? So the ice is melting, and there's going to be a big flood. There's going to be a big meltdown. It's going to destroy all life, kill everybody. It's kind of like a Noah's Ark sort of situation. So Manny and Diego and Sid and all the other creatures in this sort of field, a clearing, shall we say, have to get to the other side of the clearing where there's a giant old piece of wood that they can all get in. It's like a Noah's Ark, and it will save their life so they won't die and drown. That's all fine. I'm okay with that. That's not a bad premise story. That's good. The bit that confuses me is that they're inside a giant bowl. Right, so you've got this huge clearing that's got hardly any bit of ice, mostly just snow, but it's mostly a big clearing, right? And on all sides, like a giant oval, is just 100 feet high of snow, of ice around them, right? And my question is, how is it? Well, one, how is it that they got there? Two, why is nobody asking how do we get out? And three, there's predators in there. Like Diego, let's admit it. Guess it's a kids' film, but Diego's still a predator. He needs his meat, right? And he's the only proper predator that we see in this bowl, in the shape, apart from the giant prehistoric sort of birds of prey. What are they called now? Vultures, right? Again, it's the fact of I would imagine if they're stuck inside this bowl, there wouldn't be a lot of omnivores left. There would not have vegetarian animals left because Diego would have ate them all. And how did they get there? At the end of Ice Age 1, they weren't in this giant bowl. You know what I mean? Or maybe this bowl's bigger than you think, and maybe we already was. Again, I don't know. But again, I know it's a kids' film, but like, as an adult and as a pedantic reviewer, I have to be a bit specific and be like, that makes no sense. But again, I know it makes sense for the story, but like, why is nobody questioning why they're inside a giant bowl and how they got there and why they're stuck there and how to get out? You know what I mean? But again, I digress. It's a kids' movie. I've got to sort of put my hands up and be like, okay, fine, kids' film, kids' logic, fine, okay. Moving on. We have a lot more scrap in this. One thing that I liked about the first Ice Age movie was that we got those little moments of scrap, and they were only tiny, they're only short. Were moments where he was like trying to get his acorn at the top of a tree, and then he got struck by lightning, and that his acorn turned into popcorn. You know what I mean? It's silly little things like that. They're only small little beats, but like they were funny enough to kind of tide you over till the next scene. Whereas in this one, you have longer moments now, longer sort of short interludes with Scrat, where he's trying to get this one nut that he's trying to get hold of, and it's fun. You have one where he gets attacked by piranhas, and he just goes absolutely berserk and decides to attack all the other piranhas and goes proper kung fu fighting, Hong Kong Fooey. I love it. There's another one where he's trying to get the acorn from under the ice, and he ends up getting himself trapped, and he gets himself like a little sort of ballerina skirt full of ice. Funny little things, like they make me giggle. Even at 25, I'm still giggling at them because they're funny. In the reason why they work so well is because it's silent. It's a silent protagonist. I'm not saying that, Scrat is the next Charlie Chaplin. I'm not saying that. But the reason why Mr. Bean and Charlie Chaplin, and even a lot of the old Lauren and Hardy movies, the reason they worked for so long and are adored by so many people is because when you have a character that doesn't talk at all, but can convey what they're feeling or what they're doing or be funny or silly or whatever without any words, right? That works in multiple languages. That's accessible for multiple people, right? And that's the beauty behind, I think, Scrat, and why Scrat is such a beloved character. Not just because he's silly and you feel sorry for him because he really never gets his nut, but it's that very much the fact of, because he's a silent protagonist, you can sort of connect to him. You can see that he's angry. You can see that he's annoyed. You can see that he's happy. There's moments where you can tell that he's really about to go to berserk, and he does. And the little noises he makes. So again, that's why I feel like Scrat works so wonderfully as a character, because it speaks volumes for all of us, all of our emotions when we're happy, stressed, when we want to get something, then we can't get it. It's too far out of reach, and it's just universal as well. So people of all ages, kids and adults of all nationalities, all languages, can really sort of understand what this character is feeling and still have fun and still laugh. So for that, it's quite wonderful, and that's why I enjoy Scrat so much, because he's just such a versatile, fun, silly little character, and it works so wonderfully. Um, then moving on, so this story again, it follows Diego, Sid, Manny. As I mentioned, the ice is melting. They've got to get from one side of the bowl to the next, and as we go on, it starts to kind of be more. It starts to, how can I explain it? Manny is growing more aware he's the only mammoth left, especially in this valley anyway, that if he doesn't get to this log, he's extinct. But then again, would it matter? Because there's no other mammoths in this clearing. So it's a fact of, if he does die, would it matter? And he's starting to question his existence, and that maybe he is the last mammoth, that the ice age is coming to an end, and that mammoths are dying off. Now, obviously, in hindsight, we know that that was the fate of the mammoth, sadly, that it eventually started to um, wear off and wear off. Yeah, it's not a pair of shoes, Luke. I know. Well, they went to die off and they went extinct. That's it. That's what I meant, die off. They went extinct and eventually, they're gone. I know nowadays some scientists are trying to say they can bring the mammoth back, which I'm all for it, but at the same stage, that same group of scientists want to bring back the dodo, which, don't be wrong, I love the dodo. It's one of my favorite sort of like extinct birds. I find them so fascinating. But again, what would be the point? What would be the point bringing back the dodo? Like the Tasmanian tiger, I think it was, that went extinct. That would make sense. That one's, bring that one back and bring back the mammoths. But a dodo, no, I don't know. I'd like to see one, but I don't know. But again, I digress. Going back to what I was saying, he's starting to question his existence, man, he is, and he finally meets another sort of mammoth, but she's crazy. She thinks she's a possum, so he has to contend with that one, and it's that back and forth between him and Ellie, basically trying to convince her, like, you're not a possum, you are a mammoth, you know. And it's one, and it kind of leads me on to this next part, which is the fact of, I get it. It's a meltdown. It's in the title. Ice is melting, extinction. All this jazz, right? But for me, I've said this many times. I watched the first Ice Age so many times, and I watched it again to review it last year. When I first watched Ice Age 1, and it from watching that now as an adult and seeing the really heartbreaking moments when Manny's remembering his family that had been killed by humans, and then when you dive deep into the idea that he doesn't like humans, this is why he doesn't like humans, and it took a lot for him to not just save one of the humans, save the baby, but to look after them, and also to give it back. Like when the male and the dad went to go sort of spear him, he's basically Manny stood up to him, took the spear out of his hands, threw it away. He was like, "No, we're not doing that now, right? Here's your child. Here you go." You know what I mean? And in a way, that was like Manny making amends for the with Man a bit. You know, you took my child, but I saved your child. You know, again, I might be going a bit too deep into it, but that's just how I interpreted it when I was watching it. Um, but going back to this film, I find it hard to believe that Manny would move on from his other family so fast. Now, again, I don't know how much time has passed from Ice Age 1 to Ice Age 2. It could be years. It could be months. It could be anything really. It's never really sort of stated, and that's not kind of the point of the movie. It's not to kind of state how much time's passed. It's kind of the fact of we meet these characters in this event of their life, really. Um, but I just find it hard that after the sort of traumatic experience Manny had with his last family, and granted, I know he's starting to question his existence and him being going extinct and all. I just find it a bit hard that he would the first mammoth girl that he would meet, he would just fall madly in love with her. Again, I know, I'm being sort of pedantic. I know it's a kids movie, but I don't know. It just feels a bit. I don't know. It doesn't feel like that would happen. But again, it's a kids movie. You know, they have to get the plot on, move the plot on. You know, in one direction. They have to have the love interest. They have to kind of push the idea of Manny's going extinct and that he doesn't want to go extinct. So the first mammoth he meets, he falls in love with her, and you know they grow a relationship and they have kids and they sort of prolong the mammoth sort of line and all that jazz, really. Um, but I don't know. It just feels like it doesn't feel in character to me. But again, I'll let it slide again because it's a kids movie. Then we get a sort of a side story with Sid, the Fire King, which in my opinion is part of the best parts of the movie. Um, you probably, if you got TikTok, you probably seen on TikTok where he's doing he does the Sid dance, the Fire King dance. Humana 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 ha. Bing 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 boing 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 bing 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 boing boing ha 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 fa say I don't know. I'm not gonna sing, you know. I don't know all the words. I just I don't even know why I did that really. I should have moved on, but I just decided I'm gonna break out into song. But that's my favourite part of this movie is the Fire King. Um, to be honest, like I said, this film I enjoy it, but again, I'm still sort of hung up on the first movie. I still prefer the first Ice Age, and I would rather have there only be one Ice Age than the multiple that we've had so far. But again, I enjoy it to a point. There are certain things, but overall, it's a fun film. Um, you can obviously tell that a lot of the budget went into water effects and the quality of the water, um, because even though that the animation style is done better and if it looks a little bit more realistic, you can tell that obviously because they're a meltdown and because the whole idea is this big flood, this big Noah's Ark event, this big extinction, a level global sort of event. You want the water to look better, so the water looks really, really good in this film. So that was a little something I wanted to mention. Um, it's funny, just because Scrat like this meltdown would have happened anyway, but it probably would have happened for quite a while. But Scrat being Scrat, at the beginning of the movie, he basically decides that he's going to find somewhere to put his nut. He puts his nut into the ice sheet, hits it, cracks it in half. Next thing you know, basically, next thing you know, the the ice is cracking, the water's starting to rush in, and it's slowly starting to leak, and eventually, sort of, the meltdown happens. And I just find it funny how he starts the flood, but he also stops it by doing the same thing. Where he finally gets his nut back, he's oblivious to everything that's going on below him. His main goal and focus is getting this acorn, this nut. Where I don't know what he wants to do with it. He always seems to wants to bury it, really. And he decides to bury it and walk away. So again, what's the point of him getting his nut if he's just going to bury it, if he's not going to eat it? I don't know. It's just a bit like. Anyway, it's a kids' film. I'm going too deep. Luke, you're going too deep. Just Keep going. Anyway, so he decides to bang his nut into the ice sheet, and it cracks open again, allowing all the water to escape. And again, this is another thing that makes no sense. All this water escapes out this crack, right? That goes into another valley, right? This big valley outside this huge ice sheet, right? And somehow, after all this water's cleared, these mammoths come out of nowhere and just appear. I'm like, were these mammoths standing around behind this wall? Did they happen to see it open and they're far away? They just ran to the crack? Because they all should have been washed away. I know it's a very magical moment where the big mammoths come in and Peaches, Ellie and Manny realise they're no longer the sort of the last mammoths, that there are loads of mammoths left. They were just sort of stuck inside this huge bowl. Um, but then it's very much the fact of what were they doing there? You know what I mean? Like, the mammoths are back. This is great. But what makes me laugh is the fact of they completely ignore Manny. They completely ignore Ellie, and it kind of again it makes me think, because when you see the size of the other mammoths, how big they are, it's very much the fact of, was Manny the runt of the litter? Was the reason Manny was on his own was the fact of, because he was the runt, his family left him? And maybe that's a very depressive idea, because in a way it kind of works, because if you think about it, Manny being the runt of the litter, his whole herd, shall we say, left him, so he was left to fend for himself. He found a wife, child. They sadly got murdered by humans. He then resented humans, got very sort of lonely, depressed, and sort of single-minded, stay on my own, the lone wanderer sort of thing. Sid was left by his family. He's left by his family multiple times. He has nobody. He's on his own. He meets Manny. There we go. You also have Diego. Again, very much he had a herd. He had his pack. But again, he realizes that that he's better where he is with Manny and Sid than he would ever be with his pack. That's not who he wanted to be. So if anything, his pack disown him and he disowns them. So if you think about it, Manny, Sid, and Diego are the three lost souls. You know, they're not wanted by anybody. They don't belong with anybody. The only people that they belong to is each other. And I think if you think of it like that, it's kind of beautiful. It's kind of sweet. It's kind of lovely to think that these three lost souls all found each other and now have their own pack, their own family. Yes, it's an odd bunch. An elephant, a vegetarian, and like a meat eater. Makes no sense, but it works. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It was kind of that thought of like, well, maybe he was the runt of the litter. Maybe Manny was kind of, all the other mammoths are very bigger than him. That's maybe why he feels like he was extinct, because he hasn't seen any more because they all left him. Maybe, that's the idea. And then at the end of the movie, Manny gets with Ellie, saves the species for now. I say for now is because, well, in hindsight, we all know that the mammoths eventually went extinct, sadly. And then Sid saves Scrat. Scrat is in heaven. He's finally got where he wants to. He's in acorn nut heaven. They're all around him, and then right in front of him is the biggest acorn he's ever seen in his life. He goes over to grab it. Just before he gets there, he gets pulled back to reality, brought back to life. Sid, he's like, "Oh, I brought you back, little buddy. You saved you." And then Scrat is royally annoyed, royally peed off, so he just attacks him. And that's the movie, really. I managed to kind of condense this whole sort of hour, 45-minute-ish sort of film in 22 minutes. Obviously, there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more characters. Like, you end up seeing a lot more sort of wildlife. You see a lot more animals. Again, because of a lot more animated, probably a lot more. Blue Sky Studios probably had a lot more staff at this point, a newer engine, so they were able to do a lot more, animate a lot more, and that sort of thing, really. And again, you have the possums, Ellie's two brothers. They're fun. They're interesting, kind of comic relief. But overall, it's not a bad movie, right? It's not a terrible movie. It's just me being who I am and me being a cynic, really, is that I just like Ice Age 1. Ice Age 1 was a fantastic story. It told the story of all these different characters. These three lost souls found each other, were united over one common goal to save the baby. Well, obviously, Diego wanted to eat the baby, but eventually he wanted to save the baby. And eventually they have their own herd, their own pack, and they walk off into the sunset. you know, and I don't know. It's just the fact of it's nice to see them together again in this film, but I'm just very much the fact of I didn't feel like I needed to know what happened next with them. Like they ended well, and I just like to feel like they lived the rest of their days together, and then the Ice Age ended, and then as we all know, they died and life moved on. But um, the first Ice Age movie made a lot of money for Blue Sky Studios. Then they made Robots, which did really, really well. And it was the fact of, well, we know what we're doing. Let's go back to our old IP. Let's go back to what we know. And they went back to Ice Age 2. And Ice Age 2 did really, really well. And then from there, they weighed on and made more movies. But I just feel like, I don't know. I just feel like I didn't need any more. But I like this film for what it is. So looking back on it, give it a rating out of 10. I'd give it a 6. It's not perfect. It's not bad. It's good. It's a bit better than good. It's yeah. I don't know what's better than good. I want to say all right, but like all right sounds worse than good. Really, it's kind of what you say is how was that sandwich? Oh, it was all right. Could be better. Um, so it's a bit bigger than good, but not totally all their way to great. Not as great as the first film, but it's enjoyable. And again, if we kind of take all sort of me being pedantic and me being very sort of picky and all this stuff, really, if we take it down to brass tacks and we look at the audience and we look at who this movie was made for, it was made for the kids, it was made for the younger sort of generation to kind of teach them about global warming, to teach them about extinction, to teach them about friendship and love and all that jazz, and just have a fun and a laugh and with Scrat and that sort of thing, and the Fire King and the possums and all that jazz, really. Like overall, it's for kids, it's perfect. It does a great job. Continue on the story and sort of telling that narrative, and it's good for kids, and that's what the whole point of it at the end for. It's not made for me, my 25-year-old sort of cynical reviewer who only really likes the first Ice Age movie and thinks all the others shouldn't have been done. But that's why we review things. That's why we look back on what we used to love or things that we remember from our childhood and we reflect on them now, and then we see if our sort of opinions or our feelings have changed. And my feelings haven't changed, but I just understand and respect it a bit more. I just feel like the first Ice Age is better. But again, no point repeating myself and going round in this circle. Thank you all for listening to this review, and I'm gonna go off to the end now. So for you guys sticking around to the end, thank you. And those that you're going to leave and hop off and don't listen to the end, just want to say make sure that you follow me on Twitter at Nerdstalgic_pod. And if you listen to this on YouTube, please give me a like, subscribe, and even leave me a comment. If you agree or disagree, tell me what Ice Age movie you like, or tell me any other the Blue Sky movies that you like. Whatever you feel like is fair, let me know. I'll be really interested to hear your opinions. And yeah, so I'm going to end it all now, and I will catch you in a minute. And for you beans that stay to the end, thank you very much. I know not many of you beans do, and that's fine. Like none of you have to stay till the very end. But for those of you that do, I really do appreciate it. And I'll make it quick I don't waste any of your time, so you can get on watching the next episode of a podcast or audiobook, or just get on with your day. So as always, thank you very much for listening. I really do appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at Nerdstalgic_pod. You can also find this podcast on Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music Podcasts, Audible. I'm also on YouTube at the Ginger Bookworm. I mean, not Ginger Bookworm. The Nerdstalgic podcast. The Ginger Bookworm is not. I haven't used that one in a while. But no, YouTube at the Nerdstalgic podcast. So follow me there, like, subscribe, and all that jazz. I really do appreciate it. I recently reached 60 subs, so it would mean a lot to me if you haven't subscribed yet to subscribe. My next goal is 70 subscribers, so if I can reach that before year's end, I will be absolutely overjoyed with you beans. I really, really would be. If you listen to this on Spotify, don't forget to give me a star rating from 1 to 5 stars. 5 stars, best thing you've heard in your life. You love my voice so much, it's like chocolate milk. You want to go take me out to dinner and marry me. Or 1 star's terrible, hated it. It was like, this guy, he only liked Ice Age 1. I only like Ice Age 2. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Whatever you feel like is fair, 1 to 5 stars. It helps out immensely. Currently, we're at 18 of you beans have rated my podcast on Spotify, and I'm really appreciative of you beans that have done. So really, really thank you so much. It means a lot to me. And yeah, so as always, you've been listening to the Nerdstalgic podcast. I've been your host, Luke. Thank you ever so much, as per usual. I love you all. And yeah, peace. Enjoy the rest of your evening, night, or day. Or, yeah. Bye-bye.